Good evening. I'd like to call to order our regular council meeting of Monday, September 14th at 6 p.m. And I'll begin with acknowledging that we are holding this evening's meeting in the traditional territory of the Wasanich Nation. And I'd like to begin with introductions. I'm Mayor Cliff McNeil-Smith. Joining us is Councillor Chad Rintoul, Councillor Scott Garnett, and joining us via video conferencing is the Councillors Sarah Duncan, Councillors Barbara Fallett, Councillor Terry O'Keefe, and Councillor Peter Wainwright. Good evening, colleagues. And for the benefit of the public and colleagues who can't see the staff in attendance, I'll indicate that our CAO, Mr. Humble, is in attendance. Our Senior Manager of Current Planning, Alison Verhagen, is in attendance, as is Senior Manager of Long-Term Planning, Corey Newcomb, our Manager of Engineering, Bruce DeMare, and of course our Corporate Officer, Ms. Nelson. And I'll turn to the agenda. I do have a couple of items with regards to the agenda. We do have a council report from Councillor Fallett under that item. But turning to correspondence for information, we've had a number of requests to raise a number of items to consider under correspondence, and I'll go through those now. The first is item 16.1, the email regarding waste management. I'll raise that to item 14D. We currently have 3 items of correspondence, so that'll become 14D. The items 16.3 and 16.4 are both letters regarding mandatory mask wearing, and I'll raise those to item 14E. And then we have the letters together under 16.5 regarding comments on additional pickleball in Iroquois Park, and I'll move that to item 16.5. And I would look for a motion to approve that agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now turn to our public participation period, and we're pleased to welcome speakers this evening, and we also have 3 submissions, written submissions, which Mr. Humble will read out momentarily. But I'd like to turn to our speaker who has joined the call, Ms. Cindy Pendergast. If you could give us your address, and the floor is yours. Public participation is approximately 3 minutes for speakers, and welcome this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My address, I'll use my commercial address. It's 2410 Beacon Avenue in Sydney. And as you know, my name is Cindy Pendergast, and I want to say again, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of staff, and members of the public. My name, again, is Cindy Pendergast, and together with Brad and Zach, we are the proponents for a legal licensed cannabis store in Sydney. And this evening, I intend to directly address some of the facts that are contained within the VHA report, so often cited in our discussions. The VHA report of several years ago, when read in its entirety, emphasizes the value that the legalization of cannabis has by regulating cannabis retailers such as us and strictly controlling access to minors. The report states, and I quote, "Promoting and protecting health should remain the primary concern within a legalized framework. Alcohol, tobacco, and opioids continue to cause a greater burden of disease and harm than cannabis." The VHA report also notes that local government and all of us play an important role in supporting that legalization and the destigmatization of cannabis. It is clearly stated within the report that VHA does not oppose cannabis, but rather seeks to educate and ensure that minors are well protected from the illicit drug trade by supporting legal licensed cannabis stores, such as the ones that have opened in Uptown or will open shortly, also in the Bay Centre. I will note that the Bay Centre and Uptown also host people of all ages, including children, who are protected from seeing cannabis inside the stores by law. What we are doing is facilitating the aims of VHA, Health Canada, and of course the people of Canada who have voted to support, and we have legal cannabis because of that. I also quote Dr. Bonnie Henry, but not her lovely, be calm, be kind, be safe. Rather, I quote her lesser known statement regarding legal cannabis. I haven't tried it yet, but I think I might. I end this evening by asking members of council and members of the public who have yet to really explore cannabis and the benefits of it to take a trip into Victoria, for instance. Go down and see what Farm is doing on Government Street. Cannabis retailers are like wine merchants in some respects. In our case, we intend to offer a very upscale and craft cannabis boutique experience. And because we're in Sydney and we're all getting older, we want a firm emphasis on CBD for our aging population. We will direct folks to the very helpful medical professionals who will provide guidance on how cannabis products may help them. I end this evening with a very sincere invitation. All members of council, and in fact, any member of staff or the public who would like to come on in and chat with us, we invite you to do so. Please come into our store, see how we intend to make it both inviting and, of course, compliant. Hear a bit about cannabis, hear a bit about why we are so excited to bring it to our community. And one final note. In a truly serendipitous fashion, Thailand, a country Brad, Zach, and I have spent a number of vacations in, and with a 97% Buddhist population, has voted today to legalize cannabis. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you, Ms. Pendergast, for your comments this evening. And I'll now turn to Mr. Humble. We have 3 letters of correspondence to be read in public participation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first letter is from Julie Snedden, Graham Debling, and Susan Samasco, and it's regarding creating community gardens in Sydney. The email is dated September 9th, 2020, and it reads as follows. As local citizens and residents, we write to enthusiastically support the creation of 1 or more community gardens in Sydney. We believe that such an initiative would bring many benefits to the town and would contribute to Sydney's future well-being, and in a small way, at first, its long-term sustainability. The advantages of community gardens have been well documented. They help to build a healthier community, promote mental and emotional well-being, contribute to the creation of healthy relationships between residents and the municipality, provide an important source of food for residents, including those who rely on the food bank, create educational and stewardship opportunities, bring people of all ages and cultural backgrounds together, make effective use of undeveloped and underutilized land, provide opportunities for young people to get involved in sustainable activities, and generate pride in the community. We recognize that there are many issues that need to be determined to get started, including identifying potential locations, sources of water, security, an effective membership management model, funding, etc. However, we strongly believe the idea is worth pursuing and implementing as soon as some of the details are worked out. To that end, we would be pleased to work with staff to explore the various options and develop a plan for council and the community to consider. Thank you for your consideration of this potentially beneficial and enjoyable initiative.
Thanks, Mr. Humble, and to Julie Snedden, Graham Debling, and Susan Samasco, thanks for your timely correspondence. Later in our agenda, we do have a task force resolution on that topic, and we look forward to considering your letter at that time as well. Thank you.
The second email is from Mr. Denny Jelinis, and he resides at 2545 Oakville Avenue, and it reads as follows. Mayor and Council, thank you for providing this opportunity to speak tonight. Members of the COVID-19 Recovery Task Force have been working now for a number of months to plan and implement a range of activities to help ensure the best possible recovery of our town in a number of areas, including economic recovery, cultural resiliency, community resiliency, and to preparing for a possible second wave. I think most residents would agree that the town's initial response to the pandemic was exemplary. On the recovery side, I think the outcome to date has been less than successful. Some of the steps taken by the town, such as the expanded sidewalks on Beacon, are visible and I believe much welcomed by residents. Other measures, such as the 10% tax reduction for commercial and light industrial properties, were, I'm sure, well received by those property owners. But I wonder to what extent, if any, this tax relief was passed on to tenants who run businesses in the SBIA area, Harbour Road, or on the west side. I expect that many store operators on Beacon were not even aware of this relief, information that might have helped some owners in negotiating rent relief from their landlords. Information is for the most part simply not getting out to businesses and residents. The key challenge is how to share information in a timely fashion, and equally important, how to hear from residents and business operators about the challenges they are facing in areas like economic recovery and community and cultural resiliency. The town has tried, to some extent, to address this challenge through a number of ways, including a series of 4 town halls. The first took place on August 31st on the topic of parks, trails, and recreation. I was one of 5 external participants at this event. The 12 or so other participants were members of council, town staff, and 2 external speakers, one from Parks Canada and the other from the Panorama Recreation Centre. This was a lot of work to organize an event for such a small number of external participants. As well, while the presentations were interesting, they were largely retrospective, with virtually no discussion plans going forward. I wonder if any of the 3 upcoming town halls will be more successful in reaching citizens. Perhaps we need to rethink this model. I think one of the best ways of reaching out to residents would be to set up a storefront operation on Beacon. There is plenty of space vacant and surely more to come. This storefront would provide a venue to share information across a wide range of issues and obtain feedback from residents on plans and activities coming out of the Recovery Task Force. This storefront could also be used to reach out to residents on other important issues, such as the upcoming official community plan review. A storefront option raises a number of minor challenges, including funding, staffing, and the development of various communication products. These can be overcome with strong leadership and the willingness to succeed. Not doing it may well jeopardize any success in building back a better Sydney.
Thank you, Mr. Gelina.
Finally, the third correspondence that I'll read out is from Mr. David Calvally, and he resides at 9655 First Street, and it reads as follows. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on 2 topics this evening, both of which could be captured under the heading, open quotation mark, in this time of a COVID pandemic, let's be productive and make things happen, close quotations. As a first topic, you have 2 items before you this evening relating to the ongoing operation of business as we move into the fall and winter weather. These are Recommendation R1 from the COVID-19 Task Force under Item 12B and a request for support for expanded patio permissions under 14B. As a member of the task force, I regret that I did not see this issue arising months ago and raise it at a meeting. I apologize. It's not that I couldn't expect summer to end at some point. Perhaps it reflects on an internal fantasy of mine that this pandemic is a short-term event. If we wear a mask and follow arrows on the floor, a vaccine will arrive, and we will all be well by Christmas. We need to listen to the words of Dr. Bonnie Henry and recognize that the effects will be with us for well into the next year and years beyond. Recovery will take longer than response, and for many will be just as painful. Please help by directing staff to work directly with individual restaurants and businesses to find and quickly implement workable solutions. Proactive action needs to be measured in hours and days, not in weeks and bylaws, if these businesses and jobs are to survive. The second topic is in the same vein. When I raised the question of finding a solution of overcrowding at the Tallista boat ramp at the last council meeting and suggested an approach to the CRD, I had the feeling that this was dismissed quickly because some sort of cost-sharing agreement would have to be reached. The only solution discussed seemed to be how to restrict or punish boat owners, whether they be fisher folk or families. This issue is another one that is not going away anytime soon. It will be with us next year and in the future. Let us look for a solution now. I would like the CRD approach to be reconsidered, please. Aren't we all supposed to be in this together? With respect, David Calvely. And that concludes the written public participation, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Cavalier, and thank you, Randy, for reading those. I'll now bring public participation to a close, and we'll move on to number 5, bylaws. And the first is our tree preservation bylaw number 2195, amendment number 1, to allow waiving of permitting fees and replacement trees if the town requests a protected tree to be removed due to a hazardous situation. We have received staff reports, considered the matter, and introduced the bylaw at previous meetings, and we have a recommendation.
I'll move adoption of the bylaw.
Second.
Discussion? Call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. And item 5A2 is our building regulations bylaw number 22. Sorry. I'm sorry. Opposed? My apologies to Councillor Garnett. We have one opposed. The motion does carry. I now move to item 5A2, which is building regulations bylaw number 2200, amendment number 9, to amend the municipal requirements for multifamily buildings regarding connections to town water mains and unit submeters. We have considered staff reports in the item and introduced the bylaw at a previous meeting, and we have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that the bylaw be adopted.
Second.
Discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Opposed? Sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, are you in favor or do you oppose? Sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, I'll ask the question.
Sorry, I was on mute. I'm opposed. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one opposed, and the motion carries. We have no development permits or development variance permits. I'll move to adoption of minutes. We have our minutes of our regular council meeting of August 17th and the minutes of our special council meeting of August 24th.
With the recommendation, both set of minutes be adopted.
Second.
Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. We have no business not completed at a previous regular meeting. However, we do, under number 8, have business arising from minutes. And so I am now rising and reporting for our special in-camera council meeting of August 24th. The council had requested advice and information from its municipal solicitors with regards to the Happy Buddha cannabis retail license application and a resolution previously passed by council. And council decided to rescind the following motion, which was passed at a previous meeting, and that was resolution number 2020.36.48, that local schools, daycares, and parent advisory groups in Sydney and North Saanich be notified and invited to share the notice with parents so that they may submit their views to the town. Again, that was rescinded, and we're reporting. I do appreciate that that has been reported in the media. However, this is the first opportunity in public session for us to rise and report on that. I'll now move, we don't have any petitions or delegations, and I'll now move to council reports, and I'll turn to Councillor Fallett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just want to let everybody know we are in the middle of September, and as hopefully a lot of you recall, we've had a Sydney by the Sea 8K run in the last couple of years. And this year, COVID, of course, has made its changes and impacted things. The run is still going to happen, but it'll happen slightly differently. So it's going to be a virtual run walk. Registration is open now. And between September 20th and October 18th, you can do your run. You can also raise money for 2 charities. The ones listed this year is the Shaw Centre for the Salish Sea and the Saanich Peninsula Hospital and Healthcare Foundation. And I urge everyone to take advantage of this virtual run. You can do it on your own time. Between those dates, I registered today, and there are a pair of socks in the waiting for this. I guess it just makes it easier to send out the socks rather than T-shirts and anything else. So just wanted to pass that one on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. And we encourage all residents, hopefully the smoke will have abated by then, and we can have lots of participation. And I think this is a great opportunity for the community to not only run. It's typically thought of as a running race, but I think it's a great opportunity just to walk and enjoy, whether as an individual or with families and friends. I'll now turn to number 12, committee reports. We have a number. I'll first turn to item 12A. And we have the minutes and recommendations from our COVID-19 Recovery Task Force meeting of August 13th, and I'll turn to Councillor Fallett for those items.
Thank you very much. I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? None opposed? The motion carries. Thank you.
So out of the August 13th COVID Recovery Task Force, there are two recommendations. And the first one, recommendation one, is Meet Your Street program. And the recommendation is that council supports staff continuing to implement the Meet Your Street program, and that further program updates be brought to the task force.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Fallett.
Thank you. Yes, Meet Your Street is sort of building on it. It's trying to gather together neighbors, meeting neighbors, and connecting. It's expanding on the idea of the block watch. And as we heard a few weeks back when Staff Sergeant Wayne Connolly was there, I'd asked him the question of whether block watch can be expanded, and he said no, that was a standalone program. But using that same initiative where groups of people in an area, in a neighborhood, get together and look at how they can help one another, how they can stay connected, and what they as a neighborhood can do. Maybe it's putting up games in the neighborhood or something like this. And one of the really important things now is, as we're coming towards the end of summer and the weather's changing, the idea of sitting outside is not quite as appealing as it was just a few days ago, never mind weeks ago. But I think there are still ways that we can connect as neighbors. But the program is a bit more expensive. And if Ms. Verhagen is there, I wonder if I could ask her to expand a little bit more about what the Meet Your Street is starting to do.
Thank you.
Sure. Through Mayor Cliff McNeil-Smith to Council. The Meet Your Street program is being coordinated by Donna Barner, Fire Department Assistant. And the main purpose of the program, as you indicated, Councillor Fallett, is to really help neighbors connect with each other, to provide day-to-day support, those social connections that are so important, and just make a new opportunity for people to get to know each other in their neighborhood and have that other level of support close by. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Comments and questions. So thank you to Councillor Fallett and staff for providing that brief overview. What would help me in the future when the task force are bringing forward things for council's consideration, a little bit of a backgrounder, as well as some information on the resources that are expected in terms of time staff to be spent and also money as well. So just a request for the future. It makes it easier to be able to make a decision on these sorts of things. I think, it's a nice idea. However, I guess because I don't know enough about the amount of investment requiring staff time, I'm concerned about that. We recently received an update from staff in preparation for strategic planning about the significant time and resources that staff have had to spend on other sorts of activities, and the ambitious agenda we have for other projects and things. So I'm apprehensive about saying yes to that for that reason. If council does proceed with this, what I would like to see is that we shouldn't be developing a new program. I see this as something that we would put a toolkit together, maybe something that's existing already, and provide that to the community. But I don't see it as something that staff should be spending a lot of time on. If we do go ahead with it, I'd like to see a sunset on this, that the date, that there'll be a date that this would be researched and brought back to council, I would say by the latest by October 15th. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, this is a program that Sydney's Fire Department has wanted to undertake for a long time in terms of emergency management and increasing resilience in neighborhoods on a community response basis. And the pandemic was the perfect opportunity to dedicate some resources to this, to help this in emergency management terms, I understand it's called kind of a neighborhood pod initiative, where you're providing resources and training to neighborhood groups on how to help themselves in the case of an emergency. So the pandemic gave a perfect reason to start this project, and staff have been working on it with the assistance of Smart Risk Control when the EOC was still active, and then since then. That company has provided a great deal of resources in terms of material, developing a resource guide for neighborhood leaders to come and start their own group. So there has been a lot of work put into it. And as I said, it is something the fire department has wanted to work on for a long time. Thank you.
So I guess just a follow up, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Just so thanks for that information. I guess what I'm still wondering is how much of an ongoing commitment is this? So is this something that we're going to launch and put it out into the community and they'll be able to run with it? Or is this something that's going to require ongoing support and monitoring from staff?
Ms. Verhagen.
Through the mayor to Councillor Fallett, again, the idea is that it's an ongoing program and would only improve and expand as time goes on, as more neighborhood groups come together and are formed, and as the town can assist in providing resource materials, training on emergency response, connecting them to resources in the community. Thank you.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say I love this initiative. I'm really in support of it. It's something I've been interested in since before I was on council, since when we started having earthquake awareness in town, and there was somebody at the Sydney Elementary School who started trying to get together people to make sure everybody would get information and earthquake kits and try and help educate people. And part of the package that we got from TMO, who came to provide those earthquake kits and how to put them together, did include information on precisely this initiative. They didn't call it this, but on neighborhoods trying to get together to prepare specifically in that case for earthquake awareness. So this looks like a program that's got quite a bit of robust local information behind it and lots of things, resources already in place. So I'm very much in favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to echo Councillor Duncan's comments. I really am pretty enthusiastic about this idea. It's not just resilience, it's community building. And I don't expect it's going to be significantly different in cost than, say, the neighborhood watch programs and supporting them have been. It is unfortunate that the two can't be combined. I do understand why that's the case. But I really, if we could only pick one program to do, this would be definitely one that I would be considering.
Thank you, Councillor. I see no other discussion. I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. And I'll now move on to, sorry, you have the second recommendation.
Recommendation, yes. And this is a community garden initiative that staff there is a recommendation in our agenda, and I'm just slightly going to amend it. that staff be directed to look into the viability of what lands are available and the programs or the protocols that need to be followed and management options for a community garden initiative.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Fallot?
Thank you. Yes. So this came out of the task force as well, and it had also come forward from the risk management, and it came out through the resident survey that we'd had, and it just furthers the question of resilience, food security in our community. It's another community-based initiative, and I know from a few people who have a garden plot at Green Glades that those plots are quite sought after. The problem, if you will, is where in Sydney do we have the land available to bring a community garden into? And so this is why it was turned over to staff to resource some of the options with it. And I know if we look at simply the gardening initiative, regardless of whether you're in a high-rise or a townhouse or a single-family dwelling with a big piece of land around you, gardening can be done in any container, any size container. So the ability to garden is yours if you've got some sun and a place to put some dirt, and things can grow. So I guess the question is going to be, as a community, if we can find the garden space to do something like this and find an organization to manage the program, where is it going to be? I think the uptake is there. We may be still relatively early in the phase to bring this forward, but I think the uptake is in our community. The question just comes down to where is it going to happen and what is it going to cost? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright and to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I confess on this one, I really am troubled by this recommendation. And the thing that's troubling me is that it's one of the initial, it's in the first 6, half dozen recommendations coming out of the COVID task force. And I just don't see why this is getting such a high priority. So that, I'll say, is one of the things that's troubling me, because I was expecting that there were a lot of other things that might have come forward first rather than this. So community garden, allotment gardens, that idea has come up quite a bit in the past and has been looked into. And I'll remind council, and I guess this was when we were doing the Parks Master Plan, and there was a lot of public engagement on that. And one of the ideas that was considered was allotment gardens. And you'll see it mentioned in a variety of the parks. And it wasn't a jump on it first, this is a high priority. It was reported as an idea that got raised. The amount of, a problem with this is the amount of land that's involved to have any significant effect on our community. Because, a typical allotment garden is a plot that's about 2 meters by 1 meter, and then you need space to be able to get at it. And that includes kind of from all sides, because, weeding and harvesting and all that stuff. So it takes quite a bit of land to provide plots for 100 users. And Sydney is desperately short of land, and land is very expensive. And if we look in the Parks Master Plan, because staff have already done that looking around at our park space, you'll see some like Peter Grant Park is identified as a potential allotment gardens. But there's no water anywhere near there. And there's no parking anywhere near there. And before the developer donated that land to Sydney, because it was part of a large subdivision, the Green Glade subdivision, they removed all the topsoil and sold it to Bouchard Gardens. So Peter Grant Park is lousy land to grow anything on as well. And even if you did succeed in doing that, that is completely surrounded by wilderness parks. And there are a lot of rabbits. And we used to see a lot of deer in there, and maybe we'll bring them back by putting in gardens and giving them stuff to eat. Anyway, it's been looked at before, and we could spend quite a bit of staff time getting them to review what's already being reviewed for potential benefit to a relatively small number of people. And overall, I find it troubling to make that a priority and put our staff resources towards it. However, Councillor Fallett's mentioned the gardening in containers kind of thing. And I know that they're doing that, for example, down at Dockside Green, and that those are highly portable, like they're growing gardens in burlap bags and supplying some of the restaurants down there. If we wanted to pursue community allotment gardens that do not require public land, like we have a lot of flat roofs in Sydney, many of which are accessible, that's novel, and maybe that's something that is worth looking at. But revisiting the conventional allotment garden thing as a priority, I just can't see it making the cut, to be honest.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul, then Councillor Garnett, and then other councillors. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I appreciate Councillor Wainwright's comments. It remains to be seen, whether or not this does move forward for staff's research. My suggestion would be, and I concur with Councillor Fallett's statement, that there'll be some interest and demand in this area. Certainly, I think if we look around the skyline of Sydney as apartments and condos go up, there is going to be interest in this. How it prioritizes, of course, is worthy of consideration. My suggestion would be that if this is referred to staff to research further, that the starting place is with Panorama Recreation, to take a look at how that program has run at Green Glade, whether or not there's additional capacity there for them to take this on, if it's in the form of a recommendation to the Recreation Commission to look to pursue. So I think there are probably some avenues locally to keep this process up without being overly taxing on staff time initially. So I'll leave my comments there, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if this is a viable option, but I've mentioned it in the past, and I wonder if maybe we could approach the Victoria Airport Authority for that land sitting over there where the Gateway Sydney Crossing Mall was supposed to go. I still see that as a really good spot. The land is good, according to the ALR, for growing food. That's a lot of space. Maybe they won't need to use all of it for whatever they could develop in the future. Just a potential option that might be something that they might be wanting to be involved with in terms of being good community partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Duncan, and then I'll wish to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I agree with Councillor Wainwright's comments. I think, to me, this is one of those things that, yeah, it's a nice kind of thing. However, I think it's more complicated than people think. And so I am concerned about the amount of staff time on this. There's other things aside from looking at, for staff looking at for tracts of land. There's programs in other municipalities where they tap into people who already have yards but don't want to use them for gardening. And so there's a process to match those people up. To me, that's something that's maybe a bit more viable, and it's suited to Sydney because our housing needs assessment showed that a large proportion of single-family dwellings are held by baby boomers and older that possibly, that have yards and perhaps don't want to do much with them. So there's some opportunity there. However, I don't, in the scheme of things, see that this is something I necessarily want to see staff spending time with. The most that I would, agree to was refer this to strategic planning. I guess what I was hoping to see from the task force is a prioritized list of things for our consideration all at once, rather than things coming to us piecemeal. While I appreciate some of the things that are coming to us are things that needed to be addressed right away, like the patio space and things like that. Those are things that we want to deal with on in a timely manner to seize the moment. But this is something, community gardens, nobody's going to put in a garden at this time of year. That's something that's going to be in the spring. So the most that I would agree to is consider it for strategic planning. Thank you.
I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur with all of Councillor Wainwright's points that he already brought up about our role in this and how it's already been evaluated from the town, so I won't reiterate those. I will add to them by saying that this idea has been brought up a couple times, sometimes online or in letters or in person, and I have followed up with all of the people personally that have brought it up before this, not these letter writers, and said, great, if you're into community gardens, we didn't get a lot of interest in that during the Parks Master Planning, but I heard scattering of interest. You guys should get together, put forward, develop a proposal and come forward with an idea about where this could be done and what kind of support you'd actually need. And none of them have done it. They've all said they don't have the time, which means it seems unlikely to me they would have the time to actually manage a garden. And without a nonprofit partner in place, that's what the town would end up doing. Some proportion of an FTE employee would actually end up having to be the manager of such a community garden in perpetuity for as long as we wanted to run it. And so this is it's not something you do unless you actually have an already established group that already has that kind of administrative ability, who's got a core team of volunteers, and they actually know where they want to go, and they've looked through all the options first. It is really time consuming, and it is not something that I want our staff to take on at this time. We keep hearing that this is really in demand from apartment dwellers and people in townhouses. However, if that's true, then the first place people in stratas and these apartments and townhouses need to be looking at is their own properties, right? And looking at their own property management companies and talking to them and talking to their neighbors and seeing what can be done on their private property. I'm in favor of, if there are things regarding our bylaws or regulations, policies that are preventing people from being able to do things on their private property, like start a vegetable garden on their front lawn or something, which we don't have any prohibitions against, then I am in favor at looking at removing some of those barriers for people being able to do this on their own. But I'm not in favor of trying to help them over barriers that many people haven't even really thought through. So for that reason, I don't want to spend any more time on community gardens until we actually have a group come forward with a plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. A couple of points I'd like to speak to. The first is with regards to this being a priority or not. Council chose to form a recovery task force. We've had a process where we've requested, we have the leadership from 7 organizations in the community sitting on the task force along with myself and Councillor Fallett. We requested an intake of ideas on a couple of occasions, and we've been working through that list of ideas. And some initiatives have come forward, and we've moved them forward. We moved the Meet Your Street program recommendation forward this evening. An alternate approach to the whole process of the task force would be possible. Councillor O'Keefe mentioned, perhaps a list of ideas, and that list be prioritized. I know Council is somewhat familiar. We've had presentations and updates with regards to the South Island Prosperity Partnership in its Rising Economy Task Force. Today, I sat in on a meeting of a working group, a subcommittee, if you will, of the larger task force, and 167 recommendations have been produced by 120 stakeholders sitting on 10 different committees. And there's a process for prioritizing those recommendations in a final report, as I've reported out in Emily de Rosenthal, the CEO of SIP, told Council at a recent presentation those will be presented, or the final strategy report will be presented in November in the Rising Economy Task Force Forum, which will be a week-long event. That's a regional initiative that, as I say, involved 120 stakeholders that has gone through a process and come up with recommendations and prioritized. For our smaller community, we thought the approach of bringing leadership from 7 of the organizations with council involvement was a reasonable approach to start with. And as I say, they've been bringing forward recommendations. So we've created a task force, and the task force has brought this recommendation. And I've heard the comment at least twice this evening that we thought other priorities might come forward. Well, these are the priorities that are coming forward through this process. Separate from that, the Green Glade Gardens are maxed out, and there isn't room for additional garden space there. I don't know if there's a waiting list. That can certainly be looked into. But there have been expressions of interest in community gardens. We haven't had a community organization come forward with it, but in public participation this evening, we've had Julie Snedden, Graham Debling, and Susan Samasco, who are 3 very long-term community-minded individuals who have done a range of community initiatives over the last 20 years in Sydney, and they've come forward willing to be involved in helping to move this forward. I don't know from their communication whether they're interested in forming a group that manages this, but the recommendation to council, or the recommendation before us, is to go to staff to look at what lands are available. Here we've been having discussions on the suitability of a particular park, or the suitability of private property, or the suitability. This is something that staff can consider in a reasonably short period of time. What lands are available, the protocols that would need to be followed, resources as to whether there's water or not, and management options. And I fully expect that one of the management options will not be that staff manage the community gardens. In the community gardens that exist elsewhere in the capital region, they are managed by external organizations. We have a party that's come before us this evening with experience in community initiatives that's interested in being involved. We're not committing ourselves to setting up community gardens tomorrow. We're trying to move forward, or considering moving forward, a task force recommendation from the community for this to be considered further. So I'm fully supportive of it being considered further. I don't think it's going to take an inordinate amount of staff time, and I don't think we should be presuming that staff are going to be managing this, and this is a reason not to be doing it at this stage. Any second-time speakers? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? We have 3 opposed, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Wainwright. The motion carries. Thank you. I'll now turn to item 12B, which is the minutes and 1 recommendation from a second Recovery Task Force meeting that was held on August 27th, and I'll turn to Councillor Fallot again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Move the recommendation that the minutes be received.
Second.
All those in favor?
I have,
Sorry, discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know if this was the place to discuss. It's not specifically about the resolution. It's more about the task force in general. So just some questions and comments about the task force, if this is an appropriate time to ask those questions.
We do have a motion on the floor, sorry, motion to receive. Yes, it's appropriate at this time to ask those questions. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess getting back to previous comments about, I guess my expectation with the task force was to see a list of things for council's consideration rather than things coming to us piecemeal. So I don't know if what we're seeing here is, I don't know if there's more things to come or whatever. I know that, you know, staff have put in a significant amount of time into the task force. The community groups have also put in a significant amount of time. I think, you know, there's some lessons for us to learn in terms of how responsive that we've been able to be. I think we've struggled a bit with communications, with levels of bureaucracy that, you know, comes with establishing something like this. You know, one example I heard this week was some frustration that there was, through the task force, funding provided for signage to go up. And so once the signage was prepared, and then the SBIA went to put out that signs, they had a stumbling block because they were told by staff that they couldn't put that on public property. And yes, that's our bylaw, but I guess the point that I'm making is that I think we have to find a way to be more proactive, more strategic in how we approach some of these things. And, you know, something like that, the signs, for example, I don't know all the background, but I guess what I would have hoped is that when signs were discussed at the task force, that somebody would have flagged the point that about where we're going to put them, so that when they arrived, that wasn't an issue. Anyways, I guess, you know, the point I'd like to make mainly is that I guess a question about, you know, how long do we see the task force, you know, being in place? And what I'd like to propose is that we ask the Recovery Task Force to conclude their discussions and to provide by council, perhaps by October 14th, a report that would include any initiatives to be considered currently and for beyond, including specifics on town staff and resources that are required, a report on the outcomes that the task force was able to achieve as a result of their deliberations, and a compilation from the task force members on lessons learned and recommendations on the process. So I don't know where the point is I know we have a motion on the floor to receive the minutes, but those are things that I'd like to put forward and discuss at some point, whether that's now or later.
Okay. We have a motion to receive, and we should proceed with that. We could consider it an amendment to the motion to receive, but I would suggest that we consider the motion to receive, and we can certainly have a motion arising. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm kind of thinking along the lines of what you've just suggested. I think that Councillor O'Keefe is raising some points we should have a discussion about, but I don't think her colleagues have prepared to have that discussion tonight. I've certainly been thinking a bit about this, but I did not come to the meeting tonight to be prepared to actually have a substantive discussion about that. So I'd suggest maybe the right thing to do is to send that to the next committee of the whole, because committee of the whole is a good forum for a discussion of that kind of nature where we don't have maybe a clear motion to focus on. And I think we should just, you know, receive the minutes and deal with the business that comes out of them.
So while
Okay.
it's, Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul in a moment, but a comment I'll add is that a meeting is scheduled tomorrow with myself, Mr. Humble, Ms. Verhagen, and the Vice Chair, Steve Duck, to consider the next steps in the future and the possible timeline of the future of the Recovery Task Force. So speaking to many of the items that Councillor O'Keefe was speaking to. So I agree with Councillor Wainwright that I would be more prepared at a future meeting to discuss this, but I would certainly be more prepared after the meeting that is convening tomorrow to address that at a committee of the whole meeting. So thank you for those considerations, and I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I concur with the suggestion that's been put forward to hold this over to a more detailed discussion at Committee of the Whole. But I feel compelled just to comment, certainly to participants of the task force, that, you know, from my perspective, I expected to see a list of recommendations evolve as this pandemic and as this health crisis evolves. I wouldn't expect someone to formulate a list based on how the community influence was 2 months ago or even a month ago. This is changing rapidly. It's not done changing. We're going to continue to see challenges with this, and so my thanks to the task force, and I hope they continue providing us recommendations as this matter continues to evolve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And that is, it's one of the reasons we're having the meeting tomorrow, is because of the uncertainty that is ahead. And no one today can say how long we will be in recovery for this pandemic. We are still dealing with the pandemic itself. There was, new measures put in place by the province last week. So thank you for the comments from colleagues, and I'll call the question on the motion to receive. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. And we do have one recommendation. Councillor Fallon.
Thank you. The recommendation that came out of this August 27th meeting is that staff be directed, and I've changed it a little bit, staff be directed to research options to winterize sidewalk cafes.
Second. Discussion. Councillor Fallon.
If I can just expand on this, was, I think so often we're looking at sort of just down the road, and we've made options for good weather, and now we're coming into the bad weather, and everywhere we see other communities are looking at what are we going to do for winterizing cafes. But it's actually, I should go on with, there should be actually an amendment, because it was not just about the winterizing the cafes. We were also discussing at the time what happens to lineups, all the stores that are limited with how many people they can have in their premises. Prime example always, it keeps coming up, is Sydney Bakery. I think there's a certain amount of shelter from the weather with overhanging of the building, but should we look at some sort of sheltering for people as they're standing in lineups? But anyhow, so the prime mover in this particular motion is we need to take into consideration, as the weather turns, how are we going to accommodate these businesses that are relying on their outdoor space and to still make it inviting so that they can still keep customers coming.
Well, thank you, Councillor Fallon. I would just add, we had comments on this in public participation this evening, and that we should, the town should be more proactive in this. I might turn to staff, if I might, with a question, and that is, I'm aware of only one restaurant and one cafe, who, after we amended the bylaws, came forward and worked with staff to increase their patio space, both in parking spaces on Beacon Avenue, and I know there was perhaps a handful of other restaurants that increased the size of their patio space. Could you speak to, are there any others besides those two those two ones in parking spaces, and can you speak to the number with regards to expansion or new patio space?
Sure, through the mayor to all of council, I'm aware of 2 roadside cafe licenses that have been issued, the roadside cafe being the term for the expanded outdoor seating area in on-street parking spaces. Quince Cafe, just on the bottom block of Beacon between 1st and 2nd, the south side, and also Taco Shell, the restaurant on Beacon just west of 5th Street. Each of them has taken up 1 or 2 parking spaces on street. I'm not aware of any other ones. And in terms of how many private properties have taken up the opportunity to expand their seating into on-site private property parking spaces, no permits are required for that. So I'm not sure how many restaurants or cafes may have taken up the town on that opportunity. Thank you.
So I know there a couple have, and so I'd like to continue in that we are receiving under correspondence this evening a letter from the BC Restaurant and Food Services Association asking us to do this very thing. So, you know, the comment and public participation that we should have done this by now, you know, the Restaurant Association is only coming forward to us now. Perhaps it could have been more proactive, but we have not had, a question through to staff, we have not had one of the two, either the cafe or the restaurant or other patio space operators come forward requesting winterization options for their space as yet?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. In a mayor's periodic mayor's meetings that we have, we discussed this topic recently, and I don't quote me on the figure. I think it's something like 96 restaurants and cafes and other businesses have taken up the City of Victoria when they changed their bylaws for additional patio space, and they're just working through. Very recently working through requests from it. So I think this is timely that we're doing this, and again, the way it's structured is we have our bylaws, and we look forward to any restaurant or cafe or those with patios to come forward requesting options from the town. Turn to Councillor Rintoul, then Councillor O'Keefe. Did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree. It's timely, and I'll state that it's critical that we look certainly beyond Beacon and get a little creative in terms of how we're going to be able to help, particularly a lot of the smaller restaurants or cafes or delis where. I think their businesses, their livelihoods may be in jeopardy as we move in towards this season where people are not as inclined to stand in line in inclement weather to wait for service. And so whether that's how we deal with sidewalks or adjust the parking requirements, not just for expanded seating, but as Councillor Fallett noted, around lineups and how we allow latitude to these small businesses to process their customers in a manner in which they're going to stick around and they're going to wait in line for lunch, even in the rain. And so I hope that when this is reviewed, it's through that lens, as well as just an extension of cafes in parking spaces or cafes in sidewalk areas, that we look with I guess through that lens of trying to look beyond Beacon and seating areas, but to lineups also. I would also state that post this motion, I personally see some value, and I don't want to impede staff's progress with addressing this, but a referral of a similar nature to the ERC because they'll be meeting this month. And I feel there may be some value in asking that group, in terms of their business interests and representations, how the town could perhaps look at these very issues and get some insight from the ERC as well. And so if council will indulge me following this motion, I'll look to move referral to the ERC in this similar vein. Thank you.
Given the motion on the floor does speak directly, I mean, it doesn't speak to... It talks about sidewalk cafes and parking spaces. So I think if we want staff to also consider lineups, and I think that's certainly reasonable, I think an amendment, it doesn't speak to lineups, and I think we should refer to that in an amendment in the motion if council would consider that. Councillor Fallon?
Thank you. I was just going to ask through you to staff whether or not we should put an amendment to that, or whether staff can hear that aspect of it. But I do want that consideration to be part of this this discussion, that we are looking at what happens when people are lining up outside, and how do we ensure that there is a certain level of protection, weather protection, for people to encourage the use of businesses where outdoor lineups are going to be necessary.
Okay, I'll turn to staff in just a moment, but I might ask Ms. Nelson if she could read the motion out, please.
Yeah, so the motion right now is that staff be directed to research options to winterize sidewalk cafes.
Okay, I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen. Thank you, Ms. Nelson.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Fallot. From my perspective, it would be helpful for for council's resolution to clearly reflect what you would like staff to research, whether that's lineup space or sidewalk cafes, all of the things you'd like staff to look at. Thank you.
Councillor Fallon?
Thank you. Then can I add an amendment to this motion stating that look at options for outdoor lineups and where people are gathering to winterize lineup space, outdoor lineup space. Does that make sense?
Well, it reads, if I recall, winterize outdoor cafes, and the amendment could be and lineup space?
Yeah.
Lineup spaces, sorry. A seconder?
Second.
We have that seconded. Any further discussion? Councillor Duncan? And then Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, thank you. I will be voting against this amendment. I'm kind of baffled by it. I am not sure that or maybe they are, that people don't go shopping because they might have to carry an umbrella in the wintertime. This isn't a COVID issue, the idea that sometimes people have to line up to go into a store or something when it's wintertime. Sometimes the store you're in is full, or you get there and they're not open yet. And, I don't see this as being something the town should be spending money on or assisting businesses with. If there are businesses that want to apply for a permit to put in awnings or something to allow people to line up, I could see us maybe making sure that our bylaws, if there are specific bylaws that start coming up that say that they're not able to do that, to evaluate that then. But I don't know why the town would be involved in making sure people don't need to carry umbrellas. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you. So I'll just speak to the amendment first. I've got comments on the main motion, but just to the amendment, I'm of the same mind as Councillor Duncan. You know, in terms of people lining up, yeah, umbrella is what we use on the West Coast. And, you know, in a perfect world with unlimited resources, it would be nice to have a row of canopies or whatever down Beacon, but I don't think that is something feasible. So I would like to focus our time and energy and possibly our money on things that I think are more of an issue, which I think is the hospitality sector, and trying to accommodate them having more tables available for their patrons. So I won't vote for the amendment as well.
Well, thank you, Councillor. Before going to Councillor Wainwright, Ms. Verhagen would like to speak.
Sure, thank you. Through the mayor to council, just wanted to point out that any property owner in the downtown or any commercial property could apply for a building permit and development permit to add an awning to their building to add some protection out over the sidewalk. They would need to enter into an encroachment agreement with the engineering department for that encroachment beyond property line, But that is an option, and we have seen that on a few properties lately, if that property owner wants to protect the sidewalk in front of their business. Thank you.
Councillor Wainwright. Thank you, Ms. Reagan. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the point about umbrellas, but I'm kind of thinking that the options, for winterizing sidewalk cafes, which are outdoor space, are probably going to be very similar to the options for an outdoor lineup. And it might actually just be a different size of tent, rather than a square one that's more rectangular, because that aligns better with a sidewalk. Thing is, it's probably not going to add a lot of additional staff time to get an answer. And if that's the case, I don't see why we wouldn't ask staff to do it rather than choose not to get that information. So I'm okay with the amendment that's proposed.
Okay. Other speakers, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just feel compelled to comment further with respect to lineups and umbrellas. And I get it. I dug out an umbrella today, and I'm pleased that it's raining. I'm not sure in January and February how super pleased I'm going to be about it. And I don't think that looking at a small business and saying, put an awning on the front of your business during COVID, and with the lack of business that perhaps you've already experienced, is a reasonable expense when we could look at using some of their parking space potentially to put a temporary tent, something to allow their clients to line up in an orderly fashion and enter their place of business. So I don't think it's unreasonable at all to ask staff to pursue this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll briefly comment that I concur with Councillor Rintoul. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? We have 2 opposed. The motion carries. Now going to the main motion. I have noted Councillor O'Keefe, you wish to speak on the main motion?
Yes,
on the amended
thank you.
motion?
Yes, thank you. No, I support this. This is a good idea. The only question or comments is, I guess, before we go out and research, as part of our research for options, I presume that we are going to go to restaurants first to find out who really wants to do this. So it was mentioned that I think so far there's only 2 that are using parking spaces. And I don't know whether restaurants who currently are using sidewalk space, whether they're going to want to have maybe their staff don't want to be carrying food out in the cold, or they don't want to be serving meals outside in the wintertime. So I guess my hope would be that before staff go and spend a lot of time researching options, that they ask restaurant and cafe owners first whether they want to go ahead with that. The other thing, I guess, what I would like staff to be doing while they undertake those consultations is not only ask whether they would want to do it, but if they don't want to do that, what is the barrier for them? So if it's a case of, yeah, we would like to do that, however, the cost for us to get a tent or to do whatever needs to be done would be a cost prohibitive. So, and if that was the case, what I'd like to see is some information come back from staff about potential costs that the town might be able to absorb to facilitate this sort of thing taking place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've had letters tonight from the public talking about being proactive. I see this as a proactive recommendation. We're just looking into it, and we can deal with what organizations or what businesses wanted after the fact, but at least have some kind of mind of what direction we might take, I think is important. And as far as whether or not staff want to go out in the winter to go serve customers, I think they'd rather be doing that than not earning a living. So I think, this is another avenue we need to look at. Thank you.
Just before I go to Councillor Fallon, no, Councillor Fallon, and then I wish to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really appreciating this conversation. I think it's a good discussion. In regards to restaurant staff, cafe staff going outdoors, you know, mountain resorts have been doing business year-round for decades, and probably the rain is going to be the biggest deterrent. But being outside in the cold and sitting outside, if you're properly dressed, is nothing unusual. And I think COVID has been a turning point for so many of us about so many things. And how we do things is going to be different. And I think this is an opportunity to look at eating out, literally eating out, is another aspect of it. And so if we are going to be sitting outside in Sydney in January, if we're properly dressed, I don't think that's a deterrent. I think if the weather is really inclement, okay, that might be the time. But I think unless we've got a really blowy, wet winter, I see people taking advantage of sitting outside. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I just remind council that we do have a letter from the BC Restaurant and Food Services Association asking us to do this. So I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one other question, going back to awnings. Staff indicated that individuals could apply for a permit for an awning if they wanted to, and just wondering how quickly do those things get processed? Is that a fairly routine thing that they can come in and apply for that and get an immediate response?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, the permits that would be required is a minor development permit because the downtown commercial area is a development permit area, a building permit for adding that structure to the outside of the building to make sure that it's safe and it won't fall off, and then an encroachment agreement with the engineering department to extend out beyond property line. Altogether, it's difficult to put a timeline on that from start to finish, but we are talking weeks to a month or two. It depends on staff workload at the time and priorities, but it doesn't have to come through council. There's no public meetings for it. It is an internal process among staff. Thank you.
So just a follow-up comment to that. So that's good to know. And I guess I'll refer back to previous comments about, things that we can do in terms of cutting through red tape and bureaucracy at a time like this to facilitate things for business owners who are struggling. So perhaps as part of staff's, research on the topic of tents and other things, whether they could also scrutinize that process and find out whether there would be a way to, to make that easier. I don't know what the costs are involved as well. So that's another thing that perhaps they could be deliberate in their research on this topic. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I would just like to make the comment that while the term red tape and bureaucracy could be used to describe the municipal process for approvals, I think it would be reasonable to request, staff, and I think they would, with the experience we have over 6 months of experiencing COVID, that they would seek to expedite these requests. And I would prefer to say expedite the request rather than cutting through red tape and bureaucracy. Thank you. I turn to Mr. Humble.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, certainly, regarding the aspects associated with facilitating any potential applications, that's something that the municipal staff can look at for sure. That's not an issue. But I do want to raise the red flag about assistance to a business as well, in terms of other aspects of assistance, whether it's assisting with tent structures, those kinds of things. Those are things that we do have to be mindful of. And while it sounds perhaps a bit harsh to bring that up in the time of COVID, that's one of the realities that all municipal governments have to look at when we're looking at these kinds of things as well. So I just raise it as a bit of a red flag as well for council when we do report back.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll look to other speakers. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And none opposed. The motion carries. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I would like to move that this recommendation be forwarded to the EAC for comment.
Second.
Further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. I'll now turn to item 12C, which is the minutes and recommendations from our Advisory Planning Commission meeting, or from the Advisory Planning Commission meeting of August 18th, and I'll turn to APC Liaison Council Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries.
Okay, there was one recommendation coming out of the minutes, and that's with respect to development permit application number DP 100817, and that is 10478 Rest Haven Drive, and it was an application to construct two 2.5-story multifamily residential buildings containing a total of 7 townhouse dwelling units. And the recommendation from APC, and I so move, is that development permit application number DP 100817, 10478 Rest Haven Drive, to permit the construction of a 2.5-story multifamily residential townhouse development be approved, subject to the following conditions. 1, that the property owner address design guidelines number 20.3.25, fencing and retaining walls, 20.3.35, landscape plan to incorporate indigenous drought-resistant species and changes to grass areas, and guideline number 20.3.36, irrigation, to the satisfaction of the senior manager of current planning. 2, that the property owner follow all recommendations contained within the arborist report prepared by Dunster and Associates dated May 13th, 2020, including the installation of tree protection fencing. 3, that prior to the issuance of building permit, the property owner shall A, register a restrictive covenant on the title of the property prohibiting the future strata council from passing any bylaws that may restrict occupancy of the building based on age, and B, pay to the town a deposit in the amount of 115% of the estimated cost to complete the hard and soft landscaping for the development.
Second.
Discussion? Attorney Councilor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to comment that the APC was unanimous on this one. You'll see in the minutes that they all made a lot of positive comments about this particular design, and in particular, the quality of the design given the density that they managed to achieve on this this site.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And I'll turn to item 12D, which is the minutes from our committee of the whole meeting, September 8th, and again turn to Councillor Wainwright, who chaired that meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move the minutes be received.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? The motion carries unanimous.
Okay, there were 2 recommendations coming out of Committee of the Whole. The first recommendation, and I so move, is that the CRD Arts and Culture Support Services be invited to submit detailed budget information for Sydney Council's consideration to rejoin in 2022, followed by a presentation for Council to consider during the 2021 budget deliberations.
Second.
We have it seconded. Discussion. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett.
Thank you very much. After our meeting, I started to think about, and I'm wondering if we should also make a point of reaching out to our local arts community and asking them for some input into this discussion. I think in order for us as a council to go through our deliberations, it would be helpful to get their perspective of what they think about should Sydney rejoin the CRD Arts. So I would like to make a second recommendation after that, if I can.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for that follow-up. And I had a follow-up with Councillor Loveday afterwards. And he would be willing to, and the Arts Commission would be willing to make a presentation to, to an organization such as Artsy or other interested parties. So I think that's a good idea to seek engagement with, in some fashion with our arts community. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to echo Councillor Fallett's suggestion. I also thought after the presentation, it was good presentation, but I think it's important for Artsy to also have that presentation. And since we have made a very special effort to reach out to the CRD to potentially send our arts funding to them, I think we owe it to our local arts community to also reach out to them. And I was going to propose that staff be directed to send a letter to Artsy advising that the town is consider rejoining the CRD Arts and Culture Support Service, and that they be provided an opportunity to provide comments and or submit an alternate proposal. So I agree with Councillor Fallett on that. Thank you.
Okay, is that a motion, Councillor O'Keefe?
We have a motion on the floor, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I think, we'll go with what's on the floor for now. And then I wasn't sure whether Councillor Fallett had a motion prepared, but if she doesn't, I'll leave it to her to.
Okay.
We'll deal with this.
Sorry, I don't think an amendment to that effect is appropriate. So we do have the motion on the floor. Any further discussion? All those in favor? None opposed. The motion carries unanimous. Do you have a motion arising, Councillor O'Keefe?
Well, I was going to. Councillor Fallett has given me the green light. Okay, so I would move then that staff be directed to send a letter to Artsy advising them that the town is considering rejoining the CRD Arts and Culture Support Service, and that they, as well as other members of the arts community, are invited to provide comments and or submit an alternate proposal.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you.
Okay.
The second recommendation, Councillor? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The final recommendation from Committee of the Whole is with respect to development variance permit application number DV 100297. That's 9805 Seaport Place, the Sydney Pier Hotel and Spa. And that's to allow a new canopy sign and fascia sign. And the recommendation from committee, and I so move, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, that's 246 feet, of 9805 Seaport Place be notified regarding development variance application number DV 100297 to permit a canopy sign to project above a canopy, 5 fascia signs to be installed on one building face, and 4 fascia signs to be located less than 2.1 meters from the ground directly beneath, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. I'll now turn to number 13, staff reports, and the first is item 13A, the Victoria Airport Authority Land Use Plan Amendments, and I will turn to staff for a brief introduction.
Sure. Through the mayor to all of council, the Victoria Airport Authority is proposing a change to its land use plan, and it's providing an opportunity for stakeholders to comment. As a stakeholder, council has the opportunity to provide comment on the amendments by way of a resolution or a statement of no concern in the form of a resolution. So the staff report outlines the proposed change that the Airport Authority would like to make. It really applies to one property in the Victoria Airport Authority lands, which is at 9800 McDonald Park Road, on the west side of McDonald Park Road, adjacent to the town of Sydney boundary, but just in the district of North Saanich. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a recommendation?
I'll move the staff recommendation that council direct staff to reply to the Victoria Airport Authority with a statement of no concerns regarding the proposed August 2020 amendment to the YYJ Victoria International Airport Land Use Plan.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll turn to item 13B. We have the monthly building permit report from August.
I'll move receipt for information.
Second.
Discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll now turn to correspondence, and the first is a request for a youth transit pass program, and it's an email from Fare Free in the CRD dated August 12th.
Move receipt for information.
Second.
Discussion, Councillor Fallot.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question to you, if I may. How is this expected to be funded? While I appreciate free fare for everybody, it still has to be paid for somehow. Do you have any comments from the CRD discussions down there?
So this isn't a matter that's before CRD. It has been a matter before the Victoria Regional Transit Commission, and just for the benefit of the public, a reminder that the Victoria Regional Transit Commission is composed of 8 council representatives from the 13 municipalities. Mayor Jeff Orr is appointed. These council representative appointments are appointed by the province. Mayor Jeff Orr of North Saanich is the representative for the peninsula. And that the commission has met twice considered a request to pursue a business case and pilot project in Greater Victoria for fare-free transit passes for youth. The first time in August and then again in February 2020, and at both meetings by a split vote, the motion was defeated to proceed with a business case. And in general, the discussion was that Victoria Regional Transit System has a number of issues, a number of priorities, including electrification of the fleet and other items, and of course the decrease in ridership and raising that again is of paramount concern to the Commission. So I think there's some, hearing the remarks from those Commission meetings, that the Commission may be willing to consider this at some point in the future. I think we would have to be further along in the pandemic. And so while I'll answer your question. I do have a comment, so I'll just leave that as an answer to your question. So funding hasn't been discussed at the CRD, and the Transit Commission has not proceeded to pursue a business case. We do know that City of Victoria launched in December of 2019 a municipally funded youth fare-free transit passes in that municipality, but they're the only municipality to have done that in the region.
Thank you for that.
I might just, before going to other speakers, while I'm willing to give consideration to fare-free transit passes, I believe the Victoria Regional Transit Commission is the best way to explore the feasibility, in particular through the development of a business case for a pilot project, including financing options. So while I appreciate the request from this organization for our municipality to consider it, funding it on its own or funding a financing option on its own, I believe it more appropriate to have the Commission proceed with it at a time that they agree is appropriate. Turn to other speakers. We have a motion to receive. All those in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. I'll next turn to item 14B, which is the email from the BC Restaurant and Food Services Association dated August 26th with a request for support for expanded patio permissions.
I'll move the recommendation that matter be referred to staff for report.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? There's none opposed, the motion carries. And we'll turn to item 14C, which is an email from the Peninsula Soccer Association dated September 4th with a request for a letter of support regarding the Blue Heron Park turf proposal.
Mr. Mayor, if you may, I'd like to suggest that this matter be brought back to our September 28th meeting, and I'd move that and add some insight with respect to that during discussion.
Okay, do we have a seconder for discussion?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Toole?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In that Council have had the opportunity to review this through the package, it brought to mind certainly some questions that I know yourself in some dialogue with the Mayor of North Saanich, and I'll certainly look forward to your comment on that. Have noted a few items for clarification prior to perhaps moving forward with Sydney Council. And so I'd rather see this with every success of moving forward. It's certainly not any concern with respect to the grant and the application itself. It's more a matter of dotting the I's and crossing the T's before Council has enough information, I suspect, to be able to make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I might add that this is just a little bit of timing. So North Saanich, at their meeting this evening, is considering a staff report for the District of North Saanich to apply to a community and culture grant opportunity, and to consider ways in which, while they are completing the application, to consider possibilities for support from Sydney and Central Saanich. So I think it would be best to wait for the conclusion of their deliberations this evening, and we still do have time at our meeting on the 28th to consider Peninsula Soccer's Association request for a letter of support, as well as anything that might arise from North Saanich's meeting this evening. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, has the board of the Memorial Park Society, have they provided their support? And the reason I ask is when I was involved in the building of that field, Memorial Park Society was extremely apprehensive, well, more than apprehensive. They didn't want to have a turf field at all in that location because they wanted to maintain the natural character of that whole park. So I'm curious as to whether Memorial Park Society has put their support behind this. And I guess I'd like to see that happen first before I would consider providing a letter of support from the town.
Thank you, Councillor. That's an excellent question, and I can report that today Brad Edgett, Executive Director, Sheila Fay, Chair of the MPS Board, Mayor Orr, Councillor Gartshore from North Saanich, the MPS liaison, and Councillor O'Toole, our MPS liaison, met with regards to this application, and it is still to be considered by the MPS Board, and so that is again part of the timing suggestion for us to consider the timing of the 28th for this. So thank you for raising that, and happy to report that out. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question on all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. So we'll now turn to the items raised from correspondence for information, and the first was the email from S. Tretic regarding waste management dated August 11th, and I might turn to staff if they could provide an update on some of the aspects that was raised in that letter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start, and then maybe I'll turn it over to Mr. Demare from engineering, who's also been looking at this file. So once staff received the correspondence from the concerned resident about the practices of waste management, bylaw contacted Waste Management directly to discuss the practice of leaving garbage bins on the street for pickup, and the times the bins are being collected, and it's indicated that they're being collected very early in the morning. Bylaw is continuing to work with Waste Management to resolve this issue, and will also be reaching out to other collection firms that actually are undertaking a similar practice as well within the community. This is not something that is unique to Sydney. It's something that a lot of other urban municipalities are facing, especially with multifamily residential stratas, and how the garbage is being handled within those stratas and where it's located. So what the issue stems from is the bins cannot be accessed by the large garbage trucks themselves. These are large collection trucks. So what they do is they use a small one-ton truck that's used to pick up the bins, and then they take them and they shuttle them to where the bins can be emptied into by the collection truck. So here they happen to queue them up on Bevan Avenue, so it creates a level of efficiency for the larger truck when they go by. As I said, this is not unique to Sydney. This has been going on. This is a practice that's been going on for a whole bunch of years. In fact, a number of years ago, and several times we've tried to clamp down on not just waste management, but other collection, BFI, etc., that also undertake this practice. So we are dealing with it. Bylaws corresponding right now with Waste Management, and so we're going to sort of push them a bit harder with respect to enforcement. It's a challenge because it's not a silver bullet situation. Certainly if we require them to place the bins in front of the individual stratas, it's going to take up more time to have the refuse being dumped, and there will be added costs, not just to the company but also the residents in the stratas as well, because it's going to take that much more time. So there is a bit of a challenge there in terms of how it's being handled. Certainly, we could take the perspective that it's not our problem; it's their problem, and they need to deal with it appropriately. So we are working with them, and we're going to see what we can do to come up with some options that are less impactful than what the current practice is. And I don't know if Mr. Demare wants to add anything.
Thanks, Randy. Through Mayor and Council. Yeah, that practice is CEO has mentioned, has been sort of an ongoing for a while. In the downtown core in particular, in terms of the timing, our noise regulation bylaw speaks to residential areas that there should not be collection or deliveries between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m., but that's strictly for residential. The commercial areas are actually exempt from that component of the bylaw. So when we're asking the refuge companies to change their practice, it'd be sort of on their goodwill to not be doing it too early in the morning and take sort of reasonable times. And so far our bylaw has been discussing that with them, and they've been reasonable so far in those discussions.
Thank you very much for that update. Any questions? I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is this something that staff would come back to us with? I would be interested in staff, consulting with Waste Management, as they said they would, and coming back to council on whatever that they've worked out. I mean, it seems like a huge frustration for residents. And so I guess I would like to hear back from staff is about what's going to be done. And are there things that we need to consider in terms of bylaw amendment? Is there something we need to consider in the future design of buildings in the downtown core? I don't know, but it seems like it's been an issue for a long time. So it'd be nice to come up with some sort of solution.
I'll turn to
So I'm just wondering whether we would anticipate staff coming back to us on that.
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, I think that's a reasonable suggestion, given the challenges associated with this particular issue, and given the impact and obviously what is an ongoing impact to the surrounding residential aspect. I mean, it is part of the downtown, but we also are a mixed-use community with residential in the downtown. So there are certainly residential impacts. Yeah, let us continue those discussions or conclude those discussions with Waste Management, and we'll report back to council with respect to what options might be available.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
I'm wondering, does staff require us to make a motion to that effect to discuss with Waste Management and report back to council?
I think,
Is that
I think given this is an active file, that staff is working on this, that
okay.
They'll come back. I'll just look for a nod or a comment from, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Fallot?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may, through you to staff, I recall having a similar conversation with some residents in that same area. And they were also commenting about the garbage collection from the commercial places closer to Beacon Avenue. And I'm wondering if there is a challenge at all, because we're dealing with probably a couple of different companies doing the garbage pickup, or is it the variety of days that is part of the challenge? If I remember correctly from, I think it was on between 3rd and Bevan, one of the condos around in there, they were saying that, there's the commercial bins coming out on one day, and then there's the residential bins coming out on another day. And I don't know how to fix that particular issue, but I believe that is part of the challenge. I wonder if staff have any further comments on that?
We'll turn to Mr. DeMayor.
Through the mayor to Councillor Fallot. Yeah, that is a bit of a challenge when you have different firms with different schedules, and if you're speaking to the Town of Sydney residential pickup in their totes, they have a set schedule, but then you have other firms, and there's 3 or so of them that do pickups within Sydney on the commercial, the large bins, and how they make those arrangements with their customers. So that's that is something could be challenging to try to coordinate, that everyone's doing it on maybe a particular schedule. But that's something certainly we can talk to the various firms about to try to help resolve and reduce the impact of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, any further comments? So if we could have a motion to receive.
I'll move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. I'll now turn to 14E, which is the 2 letters, formerly 16.3 and 16.4, from Ms. Watson Ruslan and Jay Wilson regarding a request for mandatory mask wearing. I requested these be risen to discuss. We did respond, and council has seen the response to those individuals, but I have received a number of requests while both in the residential areas and in the downtown for the town to implement a mandatory wearing of masks. And just taking partly from the response from Mr. Humble to these individuals, we fully appreciate the concern on the part of the residents, during the pandemic and regarding the desire to mandate the wearing of masks in all downtown stores or premises within Sydney. However, the town does not have the authority from the provincial government to implement and enforce such a requirement. However, the public should know that the town, continues to adhere to the advice, recommendations, and health orders being provided by the Provincial Health Authority, including Dr. Bonnie Henry. And if at such time the Provincial Health Authority was to mandate the requirement to wear masks in all public and private commercial spaces, then the town would undoubtedly work with them to ensure that this happens. So just a comment to the public that we are listening, but it's not something under current provincial health orders we can proceed with. Having said that, if council would seek to receive, I would like council to consider a possible motion arising.
Move receipt.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Motion, none opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. So while the public or a number of members of the public have expressed this request, we, through the task force, the BIA recently created additional signage that is now in the downtown, and in that signage it simply says wear a mask. It's a recommendation from the provincial health officer that if you cannot properly physical distance either outside or inside, you should wear a mask. And I think it would be reasonable for council to consider supporting residents and businesses encourage the wearing of masks. And I just ask council to consider such a resolution. If we were to pass such a resolution, we could certainly communicate it through our social media, our website, and Town Talk that we are encouraging the wearing of masks as per Dr. Bonnie Henry. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I think the idea is okay. So here's my only concern is that we send something out like that and that we're going to get people calling into the town to bylaw enforcement saying, hey, there's people out here not wearing masks. What are you going to do about it? So I guess that's really only, my concern. By putting it out there, it's going to make it sound like it's an official thing. And then staff are going to get beleaguered with phone calls about people complaining about it. So,
thank you for that, Councillor. I turn to Councillor Duncan, and then I'd wish to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would be opposed to that motion. I really like the response that our staff have given to date to this request. I think as a town, we have a moral obligation to stick to that and not try to enforce more than our provincial health authorities have tried to ask us to do. I think the moment we start trying to let the public dictate to us and make this a political issue with political drivers rather than health, we're going to end up in dangerous territory. And I've said this at the preschool that I work with as well, that if we start questioning what Bonnie Henry is telling us, if we start saying, well, the health authorities, if we start agreeing with the public that the health authorities are not, in fact, doing enough, and that we need to start dictating what people do instead, we start undermining the very concept of the fact that our public health authorities are the ones who are evaluating the science and are coming up with these recommendations based on that science. And Bonnie Henry, we have no reason to distrust this woman. She has shown herself to be highly empathetic, very calm and reasonable, and trying to take a middle road. We have no reason to doubt that what she's told us is what is the safest thing that we know how to do right now. And if we start questioning her, we open it up to questioning everything she said. Well, if she's wrong about masks and we should actually be wearing them all the time, maybe she's wrong about social distancing. Maybe our science should say 20 feet, not 6, because some of the, fringe research that's come out has said that. Maybe she's wrong about hand washing, So I'm not in favor of doing anything that Bonnie Henry has not explicitly told us to do, absolutely to the letter. Thank you.
Sorry, just if I might respond, when I spoke in terms of the council considering it, I was speaking in conjunction with the provincial health order, or, sorry, not the provincial health order, with the advice that Dr. Bonnie Henry. I don't see how this would be contrary to what Dr. Bonnie Henry has advised. I was only suggesting encouragement of what Dr. Bonnie Henry has recommended, not in any way in opposition to what Dr. Bonnie Henry has said.
I guess I don't understand how what we've already done is not consistent with that. Where stores and individual businesses have already put together a WorkSafe BC COVID management plan, wherein they've discovered that they cannot maintain physical distance in their premises, they have asked people to wear masks on their premises and have asked that individually. So I don't know why we would begin trying to promote that outside of areas where we already have that in place.
Thank you, Councillor. Attorney Councillor O'Keefe.
No, I was just going to say at the SBIA board meeting this past, I guess, last week, there was different views as to, whether certain businesses were masking up or not. And so they know what the rules are, depending on their particular business, what they and their staff feel comfortable with. They're doing what they're going to do. So I guess I'm with Councillor Duncan on this about, I don't think we need to weigh in any further on it. Thank you.
I look for any further discussion. Seeing none, if we could have a motion to receive. Sorry? Oh, sorry, the motion is on the floor. I'll call the question. All in favor? Sir. When did we do the receipt?
No one would. You brought it up as a suggestion.
Sorry. I spoke to the two letters, and, sorry, did we have a motion to receive already? Thank you. I now turn to the item 16.5 from correspondence for information that's risen to 14F. And that's a letter, two letters expressing opposition to adding pickleball. In their letter, they make reference to a proposal at the town. And as council will know that we did receive by email that today. However, it has not become before council. It will come before council in the future. And I would just suggest council consider forwarding these letters to the discussion or to the time when that proposal does come forward to council.
So I beg your pardon, the suggestion is not just moving receipt, but forwarding it to future discussion. Is that correct?
Yeah, we can receive and forward, but if we're just...
Sure, I'll move receipt and let the matter be forwarded to future discussion on pickleball courts.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. Look for a motion to move the remaining items of correspondence for information.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. We have no notices of motion. We do have a motion to go on camera.
I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider a confidential matter relating to a land issue and a proposed new municipal service provision pursuant to section 90.1 E and K of the community charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
All those in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. And a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We'll reconvene momentarily.